There's been a major reorg at Microsoft. Xbox Live Gold is kind of going free, and Apple and Microsoft, they're still fighting it out over xCloud. Happy Friday, friends. It's the first full week of August is now behind us, and this was an exceptionally busy week in the world of Microsoft. There's been a lot of Apple and xCloud stuff. There's been a lot of reorg inside of Microsoft. There's just been a lot of stuff, but I hope you had a good week, and let's just dive into the news. The first item on the agenda is that Microsoft is splitting their massive IT Pro conference known as Ignite that is happening in September into two not minor, but just smaller events. Typically, Ignite is 1 week of IT Pro intensive learning, and they're splitting it into two events, one at the end of September and one in early 2021, but they're not giving us the exact dates, but Microsoft is being very clear that that event is not replacing its build or developer conference. You might be able to call this Ignite Duo, if you will. Anyway, so just be on the lookout for that. Also announced this week, there was a massive reorganization inside of Microsoft. What is happening here is that parts of Azure are now moving back, rightfully in my opinion, back into the Windows org under Panos Panay for the most part. Michael Fortin is moving back over to Windows. If you recognize that name, you'll understand why that is significant. But Cosign, which was a part of Azure, some of those key individuals are moving back into the Windows. And more crucially, I now believe that Project Reunion is now actually going to be back in Windows. If you're not familiar with Project Reunion is sort of the future of app development for Microsoft and Windows in general, and it was under the Azure org. It didn't make a whole lot of sense, and Kevin Gallo is moving back over to the Microsoft side, or the Windows side, which makes things align a lot better. The idea here is to make a more cohesive experience from the ground up for Surface, which is building hardware and software, so that it's just a genuinely better product, because the whole stack of development, for the most part, is now under Panay. We will see how this shakes out. It's going to take some time for this all to gel, but there were a lot of other moving parts. Azure Core is now a new thing on the Azure side, and just a pretty significant shakeup. This type of stuff doesn't really make its way out to the outside world. Not the reorg, but like sort of how this shift is changing things. But from everyone I've talked to at the company who has seen these people move around, this was a big one. Also, names you might have heard of: Ralph Groen, or Rolf, as I was going to say, and Stevie Batish. They're not going anywhere. Their roles pretty much remain unchanged. Realistically, what's happening here is Azure is having less teams under it, and Windows is getting more. Also, this should help bubble up Windows a little bit more in the senior leadership team. While not exactly perfect at having a seat at the senior leadership table, it is a little bit closer now to once again having that, which is really weird considering how much money Microsoft makes from Windows. That being said, there was a report out now from the Financial Times saying that Microsoft wants to buy all of TikTok, not just parts of it, which actually makes a heck of a lot more sense. It's really kind of awkward to own like just certain geographical regions of TikTok. It really just makes sense just to buy the whole org and then just own it globally. We will see, because it was rumored that Microsoft would be spending about $30 billion just to get the US and some other assets. The whole kit and caboodle could be closer to $50 billion, but we don't quite know. $50 billion based on the last funding round to make TikTok where it is today. So $50 billion is, I believe, hands down, easily the largest acquisition Microsoft will have ever made, if that goes through. Also, Parallels, the company that makes a lot of virtualization software, is bringing desktop virtualization to Chrome OS for enterprise customers. This is an interesting one. So effectively, what you can do is take a Chromebook and then virtualize some software and be able to run your enterprise apps on a Chromebook. Sounds great. There's one just like kind of massive overhead issue with this. So yes, you go out and buy your Chromebook, then you buy a license to Parallels, and then you still have to license all these apps. It's not like you can just run them on Chromebook and I don't have to pay Microsoft or whoever for these apps. Like, you still got to buy the license. So it's good for Chrome OS. It's probably good for some customers in specific cases, but I don't think this is going to be like a company wiping out Windows from their org and replacing it with Chrome OS by any means. So on to the gaming news of the week, because there's again, it's been a pretty big gaming week in the world. Microsoft officially announced this week xCloud is coming September 15th. We all know that. It's part of Game Pass Ultimate. And then there was this massive issue with Tim Cook and Apple and the App Store. And so here's how it's kind of shaken out in the span of a week. First off, Apple went to Microsoft, I believe, and said, nope, you can't run that app. We're not going to let you. And they shut down their game streaming preview. And so you can no longer play xCloud on iOS. And Apple initially responded and said, hey, the reason why we're not letting this app in there is that we have to review every single individual game coming in through xCloud, and we need to review it. And despite, there being already third-party rating services that have been around for decades of games, we're not going to trust them, and we got to review every single game. And Microsoft said, nah, that's not going to happen. So here's my problem with me paraphrasing Apple's statement about why they're banning this, because it's not just, let's be clear, it's not just xCloud. It's also Steam. It's also Epic. There's also Facebook Gaming that has also actually just come out this morning as well, saying, hey, look, we want to have some gaming stuff on iOS too, but we can't because Apple's being a bunch of jerks. Here's the we know the real reason is that Apple wants Microsoft to pay the subscription fee for all those people who sign up through iOS or similar services, and Apple wants a cut of the revenue. We know that's the reason. They're not going to come out and say that. But the problem with Apple's response is that, hey, they need to review every single game. Excuse me, do they review every single item that comes through Netflix? Netflix is a pretty darn good comparable. You sign up for Netflix and then you can stream content. You don't actually buy. There's no in-app purchases with xCloud. It's just you stream the content. And I cannot imagine that Apple is reviewing every single item on Netflix as it comes through their iOS device. That just doesn't make sense. And so Microsoft responded late yesterday, sending over the statement. It says, our testing period for Project xCloud preview on our xCloud preview app for iOS has expired. Unfortunately, we do not have a path to bring our vision of cloud gaming with Xbox Game Pass Ultimate to gamers on iOS via the Apple App Store. They really just call out Apple and say, look, your generic platform for mobile computing does not allow for our type of service. And this is going to be leading up to the antitrust battle that Apple is going to have to deal with their App Store, because this is severely limiting for the consumer. And it just kind of sucks. I mean, that's the only way. But the other thing on the xCloud side is we don't know where the PC variant is. I know it exists. I've actually used the PC variant of xCloud before. And we can't, where is it? So there's a couple questions that maybe answer it. One, the big obvious one out there is, what about licensing? You got to remember that just because Microsoft built this technology doesn't mean that they can put third-party games onto the platform. They got to get licensing, because if the game wasn't licensed for streaming, then they got to go out and pay the dollar dues and make it happen. Now that doesn't really make sense for first-party titles, if you remember, because Microsoft owns them, whole hog. But that could potentially be one, but I don't quite understand why the license or the PC side just isn't coming to fruition. We know it exists. We know that type of model works. But right now it's definitely focused on Android and Android only. So we will keep that, in your back pocket. Speaking of Xbox Live Gold, there's been a lot of noise, and I've been part of that noise, that, hey, it looks like it's going away, or something is absolutely changing fundamentally with it. Microsoft has made too many changes on the back end. They changed their terms of service. They've changed some other things. Now, Microsoft officially came out and said, and I think this might be one of those things where you got to look really granular at what they're talking about, because people question them over their changes to the terms of service, changing it from Xbox Live Gold to Xbox Online Services, which led to the idea that, hey, Xbox Live Gold is probably going away and they're going to rebrand it or something like that. And Microsoft said, hey, that change isn't related, and that Xbox Live Gold is not changing right now. Right now being, potentially the key word. But here's the deal. Microsoft announced that Xbox Live Gold is going to be free, or online play specifically is going to be free. Microsoft is unlocking Xbox Live Gold for multiplayer for all Xbox One consoles this very weekend. Every game will be free to use multiplayer from August 6th to August 10th. Man, I mean, that really sounds like, what's the point of paying for gold? Microsoft has already figured out how to decouple it, and so that online play can be free from certain dates. And this might just be the path forward for Microsoft and how they are going to position Xbox Live Gold. We will see. This is classic Microsoft, where they have all this sort of mixed messaging out there about Xbox Live Gold. And while they technically say it's not going anywhere, then they come back and tell you, like, hey, look, you don't even need to play it this weekend. It's just classic Microsoft, where there's one message from PR and another message from what the marketing teams are actually doing. And everybody is asking about the August event. It should be later in the month, I believe. Obviously, it has not happened in the first 7 days. Me saying later in the month doesn't really... It's a pretty obvious statement, but I've got a pretty good idea of exactly what it's going to be. So you shouldn't have to wait too much longer to figure that out, I don't believe. So on to the questions of the week, because I remembered to do that thread. And here we go. Let's refresh the thread. I always tweet it out. You can find me on Twitter at BDSams. And Wes says, hey, Brad, I hope you had a nice birthday weekend. Thank you, Wes. Is there any news regarding the fall hardware event on the Surface side? Specifically, I'm wondering about a Surface Studio refresh and perhaps a standalone monitor. So there is a fall event. It's going to be later. It's typically August, November. I've heard that plans have changed recently relating to some of the things that are going to happen in the fall, mostly because of what happened with the pandemic. So I still don't have a whole thing on it. And then what about the Surface Hub 2 and camera? Is there any new information on these two products? Stick around, I think is the fair thing to say on the Hub side. So yeah, just stick around. Thanks for the daily reporting and humor. Thanks for laughing at my terrible jokes. Rick says, I'm waiting till the 4Q end of the year to get a new laptop. I know the new AMD chips are giving Intel a run for their money, but do you think this means these machines will have Thunderbolt 4 and other features that Intel versions will have? Any new laptops in particular you're looking forward to? First off, I'm looking forward to the Surface laptop refresh that will have the much better AMD chips that are now available. Now, the interesting question you asked here is Thunderbolt, because you remember the latest USB spec kind of sort of supports Thunderbolt. I would be surprised. Well, it's hard to tell if the AMD version is going to have Thunderbolt yet. That's a really unique question, only because it could have the latest USB interface, but not technically support Thunderbolt. It's a really kind of sort of tricky question here. And so it's a good question, but I don't have the exact answer you're looking for. But if I were waiting for a laptop, I genuinely like Surface laptops. That is what I would recommend. Once it comes out, just wait for the chipset. As long as it's a newer AMD chipset, you should be more than happy with the performance and battery life. The new stuff from AMD is really on the mark. Usman says, hey Brad, I'm a software engineer. I tend to break things into their basic components. For example, xCloud is retrieving a video stream and sending packets based on button input. None of the video stream and button input tech is going through Apple's network. They allow for video streams like YouTube, Netflix, and Amazon, which Apple doesn't control the nature of the content. So how is this any different for those video streaming apps? It's really not. This is Apple being political and them trying to holistically own their app store and what can and cannot be allowed. The problem is, because I don't like to use the word public domain, but iOS has pretty much become like a de facto OS. It's not a niche player where they can get away with that anymore. I mean, they've got like 1.5 billion devices running it. Apple being the sole arbiter of the App Store is their weakness right now in their antitrust case. Apple runs, as he goes on, he says, Apple runs a general purpose operating system, which I agree, used by billion people, and they love to brag about being the post PC. How can bloggers not be up in arms for an operating system used by a billion? What type of software can run? No, this is exactly the issue. Apple has this massive OS, and they're artificially giving themselves a leg up on everything that they do. It doesn't matter if it's music, like you could look at Spotify in the App Store, right? If you go and search for it, you're going to see Apple Music, but not only that, Spotify makes less money because Apple doesn't charge themselves their own royalty. You can see that stuff for gaming. Apple doesn't even allow xCloud, and they've got Apple Arcade. And so they're being anti-competitive, which is going to be the key here. Is Apple limiting xCloud and Epic and Facebook and all these guys from bringing their own game store? Is it bad for the consumer? And more importantly, because bad for the consumer isn't always the most best case, but is it anti-competitive? That is going to be the key here to watch going forward. R. Baker says, aloha, Brad. If you're in Hawaii, we need to arrange a meetup so I can go to Hawaii once it's safe to travel again. Do you think we will see some sort of xCloud cloud gaming integration on a TV streaming like device? I think you will see xCloud integration directly into the TV. That is the plan. The plan is that you open up your Samsung TV and they say, hey, here's your xCloud app. Go click on it, go buy a controller, and bada bing, bada boom, you've got xCloud. Now, the reason why I think Samsung might be first is look at the announcement Microsoft just made with the Galaxy Note 20 Ultra, which is a mouthful to say, where you get a version of Game Pass Ultimate included. Microsoft has worked very closely with Samsung, and I think Samsung TVs are probably the natural launching point for an app on the TV, which Samsung already loves. Microsoft gives them a couple kibbles, and kibbles meaning dog food. And then they put their app in there, and then Microsoft has another access point for it, and Samsung on the backside gets another reason to help sell their TVs. So I definitely think we will see some of this stuff. Hey Brad, Kadupa says, why is even Microsoft thinking of TikTok? Is there any logical reasoning you can think of other than its reach and possible ad network? Absolutely. So one of the things that Google has that Microsoft does not is a massive video library that they can train their AI on. Microsoft, if they own TikTok, they can then use their AI to use learning algorithms and ML and all that good stuff on TikTok video to help train and make it better. Yes, Microsoft has video and they can go buy it, but Google has access to YouTube. And YouTube is a massive video library constantly being updated every single second of the day. And Microsoft needs a data pipeline like that to help understand and build their AI and ML models. There's also a lot of the consumer connection stuff, which is a whole nother can of worms, but that is particularly just another reason why Microsoft want all of TikTok. Sydney 2K says, hello Brad, best regards on your recent birthday. Thank you. You have pointed out for each of the Xbox iterations, a logo can be found on the console's motherboard, denoting the code word for the console. For example, a scorpion is the 1X, a snake for an anaconda, Series X. In your opinion, what is a Lockhart logo going to look like? This is a good question, because if you go back, one of the earlier videos I did this year was that I believe that Microsoft accidentally confirmed Lockhart, because when they showed off the Xbox Series X, there was an anaconda or a giant snake logo etched into the motherboard, which means that, hey, anaconda is actually the name of that, which means the Lockhart information that I had was actually right. I don't exactly know what the Lockhart is going to look like. Is it like a heart in the shape of a lock? I don't know. There's clearly some bigger meaning to what Lockhart actually comes from, and so we will find out once Microsoft actually starts telling us more about that, hopefully in the next couple weeks here. Sherlock Holmes says, I know you're an iPhone user. After years and many different Android phones, I made the switch to an iPhone XR. I like it so far. Do you have any advice, anyone looking to make the switch smoothly? So here's the biggest reason I run. There's two reasons why I typically run iOS. I do have Android phones here. I mean, there's one right here. It's that, one, my entire family is on iPhones, which makes using iMessage and FaceTime and all that stuff just dead simple, especially with my parents who are quite a bit older. That is probably the primary reason. The secondary reason is apps just run better on iOS. If you go from Android to iOS and you download Twitter, for example, on both platforms, it just fundamentally runs better on iOS, and that's why I stick with it. It's really annoying. I'm not going to say that iOS is perfect. There's a lot of stuff annoys me, especially the xCloud stuff. Apple's heavy-handed nature of telling me what's best for me is always really, really annoying, but their hardware and software integration is top-notch, and that's kind of why I stick there. Things for making it more fast and fluid, that's an old IE term, from switching from Android to iOS, my recommendation would be to try to just use a single account for what you need to do. Meaning, if you're a Gmail user, just stick with those same accounts. Don't try to set up new accounts based on your iOS. Stick with the stuff, because for the most part, all the apps on iOS exist on Android. Other than that, it's just really kind of learning the unique intricacies of the UI. So it's always, you can't teach someone how to use settings better or something like that. You just got to understand the swipe gestures, and then it's honestly like 95% the same, I would bet. Let's see. Hi, Brad. Esben says, do you think it's likely that the built-in screen recorder in PowerPoint will move to Snip and Sketch app on Windows 10? This is a great question. Or that the Snip and Sketch will gain screen recording tool. It will not be an official Office feature. It's a good question. So Microsoft is building out some of their screen recordings and localized tooling. There's some interesting things in Windows. So you have like Snip and Sketch. You have some of the screen recording stuff in PowerPoint. And then you also have like the screen recording stuff and the Windows game bar. But the Windows game bar, for whatever reason, you can't record the desktop, which is really frustrating. Like, it's so close. Like, if you're running inside an app, it's perfect. Like, that's how I use screen recordings all the time. For whenever you see I do a video and there's like scrolling of a web page, it's Windows game bar, because it worked great. But you can't do the desktop, which is really frustrating. I'm hoping that they're just kind of fleshing out that whole thing, by the way, because I want all those features, to your point, in Snip and Sketch, because it kind of makes a lot of sense. So yeah, it's a good question. An Old Amiga user says, do you have any hopes for Windows 10X given the recent retrenchment? Windows 10X has just kind of been waffling around, which is sort of the frustrating part. And, I want Microsoft to take a big risk with Windows 10X. That's the thing, is Windows RT and all this stuff just kind of, it was a risk, but I think it was the wrong risk to take because they tried to make it Windows-like, and I think people are ready for a post-Windows-like world. They're ready for something different, and so do I have hope for it? Yeah, maybe. The problem is we don't know too much about how and when it's going to ship. Yes, it should be arriving next year on some hardware. But again, there's so many things like performance, like what are they going to call it? Is it truly just going to look like Windows? Because that's sort of a challenge. I don't know. I think the proper answer for me on this question is I don't know enough yet about the new direction now that Panos has taken it over and they've ripped out Veil, which was the virtualization technology. So we will see. He says, I am concerned that if it is based on Windows, it will never be simple enough to make inroads against Chrome OS. I would echo that statement as well. Nishant says, what happened to the Microsoft Password Manager? So the Microsoft Password Manager technically exists still. It's in the Teams consumer version, but it's not a password manager like 1Password, and it's not a password manager like LastPass. Right now, it's pretty watered down, and it's just an easy way to share some sort of confidential stuff, but it's not like there's a browser plugin that we all would desire that allow you to do that, unfortunately. Mark Blue says, will the Surface Duo require a Google account? Has any method of denying Google access to user data been addressed? I believe it's going to have a Google account. If being the qualifier, if Microsoft is going to have access to the Google Play Store, and launching the Surface Duo without the Google Play Store would be that would take the risk level of launching new hardware and ramping it up to 10 here in the US, because people would be like, oh, this is Android, but I can't download the billion apps or whatever there are in the store. We would like to know if the device itself is intriguing. Oh, I would like to know if this is happening because the device is intriguing. I agree, the Duo is intriguing, but be prepared to use a Google account. Pretty much, like, there's no way around getting Android and not using a Google account. I mean, technically it's possible, but it's just not worth it. It's not worth that risk. Mr. PKI coming in asking a question yet again. He's probably one of the most consistent listeners who's asking questions. I know you are not interested in the new Android devices from Google, but the new Microsoft Duo, but will the Microsoft new Duo support 5G? If not, won't it be dead on arrival? So that's a good question. I don't believe the specs have changed on the Duo since it's been announced. That would require pretty significant tooling. Now, if it doesn't have 5G, will it be dead on arrival? I don't think so, but not having 5G definitely limits somebody buying in and holding it and using it for like 3+ years. I mean, there's some people who held on to Windows phones for a very long time without even support for that matter. It definitely limits the life cycle of the device because 5G is coming. Regardless of whether or not you're going to use it, it is coming. And what the problem here is that a lot of times a company like Verizon, we'll just use them, AT&T, everybody does this, is once 5G starts getting, mainstream adoption, they start decommissioning LTE or 4G towers to replace them with 5G, which means that the Duo will start to lose connectivity in places it once had it. Now, this isn't something that's happening next week because there's still far too many iPhones and Android devices out there without 5G. But in the next couple of years, that is going to shift pretty significantly and pretty quickly. So it's not dead on arrival. Let me put it this way. Things that are going to make the Duo dead on arrival, it's not the lack of 5G. I worry or wonder, I should say, things about the camera. The camera is going to be pretty key because a lot of people, it's the best camera you have is the one in your pocket. And if the Duo camera isn't great, there you go. So the camera is going to be very, very interesting, and battery life is going to be really need to be understood, and performance, right? It's potentially going to have older Snapdragon chips, and so performance, battery life, those are the two big things, and then the camera obviously falls into that category as well. And then how's it going to work with xCloud? Good question. I'd be curious to see if it works with something like this. It would be interesting if it could. I mean, I think these top parts might actually make it not work. And then you have something like this where it could clip into here, maybe if the screen's bent. We'll find out. That's why I want to get my hands on one to see how this thing sort of performs in the real world with some of Microsoft's premier services such as xCloud. And then Asbat says, what is the latest news on Lockhart? What about pricing on the Series X? We should know a lot more here this month. That is kind of where I'm thinking things are headed right now. Because people need to start saving, and Microsoft needs to just come out and just take it head on. That's really all they can do. But to everybody else, thanks for tuning in. Hit that subscribe button if you don't mind. It really helps me out, and have yourselves a wonderful August.